Lobo hadn't eaten in 2 days. He just barked into the woods, always at the same spot along that old overgrown trail no one used anymore. 3 times Anthony tried to pull him back, but the dog wouldn't move. At night he scratched at the door, whining low, restless. By the 4th morning, Anthony gave up and followed him. The trail was carpeted with dead leaves. Dry branches cracked underfoot. Lobo trotted ahead, stopping now and then to sniff the air, breathing fast, eyes locked on something unseen. After 20 minutes of walking deeper into the trees, the dog stopped before a thick wall of tangled green. He barked 3 sharp times, growling at the brush. Anthony pushed through the branches and froze. Behind the vines and moss, something metallic caught the light. Rusted white steel, swallowed by the forest. He tore back more vines until the shape appeared in full, an old white van, abandoned so long that nature had almost devoured it whole. His pulse quickened. Everyone around these parts knew the stories about the white van. Parents told them to scare their kids, warnings not to wander off alone, not to take rides from strangers. But those were just stories, legends, nothing real. Anthony stepped closer. The air felt heavier, wrong. The side door hung half open, its hinge cracked, creaking in the wind. Lobo refused to go near it, barking from a distance, paws braced to the ground. Anthony pushed the door wider. The smell of mold and rust filled his lungs. Inside, the floor was layered with damp leaves and decay, small faded toys scattered among them. A one-armed doll, a rusted toy car, torn clothes too small for adults, folded in a corner as if someone had carefully arranged them. On the front seat, under a thick layer of dust, lay a wooden box. His hands trembling, Anthony lifted it and opened the lid. Inside were more objects. A silver belt buckle with an engraved initial, a pair of tiny sandals, a thread bracelet made of faded colors. Beneath them all, folded neatly, a sheet of paper yellowed with age. He unfolded it. A hand-drawn map, precise lines marking rivers, trails, and 12 red X's scattered across the forest area. Beside each X, a date. The oldest read 1981. The most recent, 1996. Anthony's knees weakened. He looked again at the clothes, the stains on the seats. Stains he'd assumed were rust. They weren't. Lobo's barking turned frantic outside, sharp cries echoing through the silent woods. The stories about the white van weren't legends. They were real. And Anthony had just found the proof. He stood there holding the map, his hands shaking so badly the paper fluttered in the damp air. 12 red X's, each one marked with a careful, almost delicate handwriting, as if they were notes about something precious. The first, 1981, the last, 1996. He folded the map with care, slipped it into his shirt pocket along with the silver buckle. He needed to leave, to think. Stumbling out of the van, his legs weak, his stomach twisted. This time Lobo followed silently, pressed close to his leg, as if he too knew they had crossed a line they weren't supposed to. The walk back felt shorter, but every step heavier. At home, Anthony locked the door, dragged a chair to the table, and spread the map beneath the dim glow of the old lamp. He recognized the landmarks. The river cutting through Joe's property, the big mushroom-shaped rock marking the edge of the abandoned land, the trail leading toward the old sawmill. Whoever had drawn that map knew this forest as well as he did, maybe even better. He grabbed a pencil and a clean sheet of paper, jotting down the dates. The first mark, October 1981. The last, March 1996. 15 years, one each year, sometimes 2. Always during the dry months, when the trails were open, when it was easier to move through the woods without leaving tracks in the mud. Anthony closed his eyes, forcing his memory back. In 1981, he was in his 20s, working for the county, fixing rural roads. He remembered the talk at Joe's store, mothers crying about missing children. The explanations were always the same. Kids running away to the city for a better life. Poor families losing hope. No one asked too many questions. No one really investigated. But he remembered something else. A white van that used to show up now and then on the dirt roads. The driver always waved, polite, smiling, a middle-aged man, neatly dressed for a rural place, hair combed to the side, mustache trimmed. Anthony had seen him parked near the old country school a few times, waiting, watching. Back then he thought the man was a parent, or maybe a teacher, someone with a reason to be there. Anthony's stomach turned as he realized he hadn't seen that van since 1996. It had just disappeared, and he had never thought to wonder where. People vanish out here. They move away, they die quietly, and they're forgotten. That's how small towns work. Memory is selective. Silence is currency. Lobo growled low, ears up, eyes fixed on the door. Anthony heard footsteps on the dirt outside, steady, deliberate. Knocks followed, firm, measured. He slipped the map beneath the tablecloth, stood, and cracked the door open just enough. Joe was standing on the porch, hat in hand, that serious look he wore when something was wrong. Behind him, the sky was darkening, heavy clouds gathering at the horizon. "Heard you went down the old trail today," Joe said, skipping any greeting. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was something underneath it Anthony couldn't quite name. Something like fear. Anthony gripped the door tighter, feeling the map burn against his chest through the thin fabric of his shirt. Joe pushed the door open with his shoulder before Anthony could even step aside. Lobo growled from the kitchen, low and tense, but didn't move. The older man scanned the small, dimly lit house, the table, the chair pulled out, the lamp still burning, though the sun hadn't yet set. "You shouldn't have gone out there." Joe took off his hat, ran a rough hand over his thinning hair. "That trail's dangerous. Rotten trees, sinkholes, snakes. People get hurt back there." Anthony crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. The map in his pocket pulsed like a second heart. "I found something." Joe stopped moving. Silence thickened between them, the kind that feels like the air before a storm. What kind of something? An old van. White. Buried under brush. Anthony watched every twitch of Joe's face, every flick of his eyes. Looked like it had been there for decades. Joe's jaw tightened. He turned toward the window. Anywhere but Anthony. Plenty of junk out there. Folks leave cars to rot when they can't tow them. Nothing new about that. There were things inside, Anthony said quietly. Toys, kids' clothes, stuff somebody kept like it mattered. Joe looked back at him, and this time there was something new in his expression. Not surprise, not confusion, but warning. "You didn't touch anything, did you?" Anthony didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence spoke for him, his fists curling on their own. "Listen to me, real careful." Joe stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hoarse whisper that was half plea, half threat. "Some things are better left buried. The past stays where it belongs. You're a smart man, Anthony. You know how it works out here. Digging that up won't do anyone any good. For no one. Or for you." The words slipped out before Anthony could stop them. Joe froze. His eyes locked on Anthony's, measuring, calculating. After a long, heavy moment, he put his hat back on and walked to the door. Hand on the knob, he paused without turning around. "You got family, Anthony? Folks who count on you? A name worth keeping clean in this town?" "Because I do. And I won't let anyone tear down what I built just because they don't know when to keep their mouth shut." He slammed the door so hard the lamp on the table rattled. Anthony waited until Joe's footsteps faded before pulling the map from his pocket again. His hands shook worse than when he'd first found the van. Lobo patted over, pressing his nose against Anthony's leg. Anthony stroked the dog's head, staring at the 12 red marks. Joe hadn't denied a thing. He hadn't asked what kind of things Anthony had found. He hadn't shown shock or curiosity, only fear. Desperate fear, which meant Joe knew. He'd always known, and that made everything so much worse. Anthony folded the map, tucked it into the drawer where he kept his few important papers, locked the front door, shut the windows, though he knew no lock could keep out what he'd just unearthed. He didn't sleep that night. Sat in the kitchen chair with his hunting rifle propped against the wall within reach. Lobo lay at his feet, alert to every creak, every crack of branches outside, every sigh of wind over the roof. His body stayed rigid till dawn, but no one came. No threats, no shadows. Just that heavy rural silence where secrets rot slow beneath the earth. When the sun rose, Anthony made bitter coffee and ate stale bread without tasting either. He needed answers, but he didn't know where to start. He couldn't go to the sheriff. The man drank at Joe's store every evening, owed him too many favors to be trusted. And asking questions around town would just send word back to Joe before noon. That's when he heard a car engine grinding up the dirt road toward his house. He stood fast, hand reaching for the rifle, then froze as the old sedan came into view. A woman stepped out. Tall, thin, her graying hair pulled into a loose bun, carrying a worn leather bag. Maria. He hadn't seen her in over 20 years, not since she'd left for the city to work as a nurse. Time had carved lines around her eyes, bent her posture, but her gaze was the same. Dark, sharp, seeing right through people. Anthony. No smile. Just his name, quiet and heavy. I heard you found something in the woods. News traveled too fast in a town like this. Anthony stepped down from the porch, keeping a safe distance. Who told you that? Doesn't matter who. Maria came closer, her voice calm but firm. What matters is what you found. What matters is if, inside that van, there was a silver buckle with the letter C engraved on it. The air left Anthony's lungs like a punch. He stared at her, saw the old pain etched into her face, and understood. Clara, he whispered. Her sister? Maria nodded slowly, eyes glistening but dry. She was 8 when she disappeared. Walking home from school, the short trail through the woods. She never made it. We searched for weeks. The sheriff said she probably ran off. Said poor kids always dream of the city. My mother died never knowing. I left because I couldn't stand looking at those trees every day, knowing my sister was still out there somewhere, and no one cared enough to look. Anthony turned and walked back inside. Maria followed. He pulled the map from the drawer, laid it on the table, and pointed to one of the red X's. October 1983. Maria stepped closer, her hands trembling as she touched the brittle paper. There are 12 marks. Anthony's throat tightened. 12 children. Over 15 years. Maria covered her mouth, a muffled sound escaping between her fingers. Then she straightened, her voice cold with resolve. You know who did this? I don't, Anthony said. But Joe does. He came here last night, threatened me to stay out of it. Maria met his eyes, and in hers he saw that same fierce determination, the kind that makes a woman rebuild her whole life from nothing. Then we'll make Joe talk, she said. He can't protect a monster forever. Before Anthony could answer, Lobo shot to his feet, snarling at the window. Outside, another engine echoed down the dirt road. The car that stopped was even older than Maria's, paint peeling, motor sputtering before dying with a cough. A woman with white hair climbed out slowly, steadying herself on the door, her breath heavy from the uphill walk. Martha, the oldest midwife in town, the woman everyone called when babies were born, when prayers were needed, when sickness came through. She carried a worn cloth bag, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Maria opened the door before Martha could knock. The two women locked eyes, and something passed between them. A wordless recognition of shared pain. Martha shuffled in, set the bag on the table beside the open map, and dropped into a chair like her legs couldn't hold her any longer. I heard what you found. She didn't look at Anthony. Her gaze stayed fixed on the map. I prayed all night. Been carrying this for 37 years. 37 years of silence. Maria pulled up a chair beside her. Carrying what, Martha? The old woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. She unrolled it slowly. Inside was a string bracelet, its once bright threads now dull, tiny beads forming a name. Peter, my nephew, she whispered, 10 years old. Vanished April of '87. He was bringing supplies to the teacher's house. Took the old road. Never got there. Anthony's eyes dropped to the map. April 1987. A red X marked along the trail leading to the old country school. They said he ran away. Martha's hands clenched around the bracelet until her knuckles turned white. Said he was a curious boy, wanted to see the world. But I knew. Mothers know. Aunts know. I asked questions. Went to the sheriff, went to Joe. He called me into his house, shut the door, and told me if I kept spreading lies, I'd ruin good people's names. Said I should accept the boy was gone and stop making trouble. And you did? Maria's voice wasn't judging, just tired. I did. Tears cut down Martha's creased face. Because Joe owned the land my brother worked. Because our family needed him to survive. Out here, the ones with land hold power, and the rest of us just keep quiet and obey. I chose to protect the living instead of honoring the dead, and I've lived with that guilt every day since. The silence that followed was thick, the weight of decades pressing into the small, dim room. Anthony looked at the two women, and in them, he saw the reflection of everyone this town had broken, all the impossible choices small places force on ordinary people. Maria was the first to speak. How many others you think knew? How many mothers got threatened to keep quiet? All of them, Martha said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Every mother who lost a child. We whispered when the men weren't around. Whispered about the white van, about the kind man offering rides. About Joe, always defending, always protecting. But none of us ever screamed. Anthony felt rage burning in his throat. Who was he, Martha? The man with the van. Say his name. The old woman glanced toward the door, as if afraid that even after all these years, someone might still be listening. Gilbert, she said finally. Joe's brother-in-law. Married to his younger sister. A respected man, polite, well-spoken. Always smiling. The name hung in the air like poison. Anthony shut his eyes, forcing his memory to focus. He could see the man now. Crisp shirts, polished shoes, even on dirt roads. Hair combed neatly to the side. Married young to Laura, Joe's sister, in a wedding half the town attended. Said he worked in transportation, was gone for weeks at a time, always returning with gifts for his wife and candy for the kids. That memory hit Anthony like a slap. Gilbert always had candy, always. Handing out lollipops and gum to the boys hanging around Joe's store. Asking about school, their families. The mothers had thought it was kindness. A rare gentleness in a hard world. Maria stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. He's still alive. Martha shook her head. Died 8 years ago. Car crash on the old highway. The same one where those children vanished. Rolled off a curve. No witnesses. Found him the next morning. Closed casket. Said the body was too mangled to show. Or he killed himself. Anthony said quietly. Or someone killed him. Martha replied. There was no investigation. Joe handled everything. Paid for the funeral. Comforted his sister. Laura never recovered. Moved to the city a year later. Never came back. Joe sold their house, burned their belongings. Said it was to help her forget. Maria's hands clenched into fists. He destroyed the evidence. Protected his brother-in-law till the end. Then erased every trace. Anthony spread the map again, studying the dates. The last mark, March 1996. When did Gilbert die? June of 96, Martha said softly. 3 months later. Maria leaned against the wall, rubbing her face. So he was going to stop. Whatever reason he had, he'd decided to stop, and that's when he died. Or Joe found out he was about to be exposed and took care of it. Anthony didn't want to believe a man could go that far, but after what they'd uncovered, nothing felt impossible anymore. Silencing mothers was one thing. Looking away, covering up, that was one thing. But killing his own brother-in-law? Maria turned to him. We need those things from the van. We need proof before we confront Joe again. If we accuse him without evidence, he'll deny everything, and he'll destroy us. Did you keep anything? Just the map, Anthony said. Everything else is still there. Then we go now, Maria said, already heading for the door. Before Joe finds it and wipes it clean. Wait, Martha said, struggling to her feet. If you're going back, you'll need a witness. Someone Joe can't threaten or buy. I know a prosecutor in the city. She owes me a favor. Works cold cases. Anthony looked between them. 2 women burning with decades of grief, guilt, and sleepless nights wondering what they could have done differently. They weren't going to back down, and he realized he couldn't either. All right, he said. He grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber. We go to the van, get everything. Then we call your prosecutor. Maria nodded, but Martha caught her arm before she stepped out. There's one more thing you should know. When Gilbert died, Joe didn't let anyone near the crash site until he'd been there for hours, alone. No one ever asked why. The walk to the van was tense and silent. Anthony led with Lobo close to his side, Maria behind him, Martha trailing stubbornly despite her limp. The sky hung low and gray, the air thick with the promise of rain that would soon make the trail impassable. They moved quickly. When they reached the spot, the van looked even worse than Anthony remembered. The forest pressing in, vines creeping higher, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow it again. Maria was the first to move. She shoved the side door open. The rusted metal screamed through the quiet woods. Anthony heard the sharp hitch of her breath, a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. When she stepped back out, she held the silver buckle in her hand, the letter C still faintly visible beneath the tarnish. "It was hers," she said softly. "My mother had it made for her 8th birthday. Clara never took it off." Martha crossed herself, murmuring a prayer under her breath. Anthony turned to the inside of the van. They needed to record everything before touching a thing. He lifted the old camera he'd brought and began snapping photos. Every object, every stain, every detail. Torn clothes folded neatly in the corner. Toys lined up by size. The wooden box filled with keepsakes, trophies of something unspeakable. That's when Maria found it. Wedged under the back seat, taped in place with old brittle adhesive. A small notebook. She pried it loose, careful not to tear the fragile paper, and opened it slowly. A diary. Inside, the same careful handwriting as the map. Pages of notes, dates, locations, and names. 12 names. 12 children. Each entry described them in chilling detail. Age, appearance, where they liked to walk alone, how to approach them. Gilbert had written everything. Cold, methodical, like a shopping list. Anthony felt bile rise in his throat. Maria's hands trembled as she read the pages, each line revealing the systematic horror that had unfolded, planned and executed with precision over years. There was no remorse in Gilbert's words, only cold, practical notes. How to pick the most vulnerable victims, how to gain their trust, how to make sure no one ever saw. The last entry was different. March 1996. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smeared, written in haste or fear. Joe knows. "I have to stop. I can't do this anymore. Laura's asking questions. The teacher's seen the van too many times. They're getting suspicious. This will be the last. After that, nothing. Blank pages." Then, 3 silent months before Gilbert's death in June, he was going to stop, Maria whispered, closing the notebook. Joe found out and killed him before he could confess. Or Gilbert couldn't handle the guilt and took his own life. Martha took the diary, sliding it carefully into her worn bag. Either way, Joe's guilty. He knew and stayed quiet. Let 12 families suffer with no answers. Anthony gathered everything, each toy, each scrap of clothing, every small object that once belonged to a child who never came home. The weight of it was crushing. When they were done, Maria looked at the map in Anthony's hands. "We need to check. See if these markings mean something real, or if they're just the fantasies of a sick man. If we start digging," Martha warned, "Joe will find out. And if he finds out, he'll stop us. Then we call the authorities first," Anthony said, folding the map. "Do it right, official, documented, witnessed. But we do it today, before Joe has a chance to act." They left the woods carrying bags heavy with evidence that should have been uncovered decades earlier. Above them, the sky finally broke. Rain poured down, hard and cleansing, washing the dirt, but not the stain of what had been done there. Back at Anthony's house, they turned it into an improvised command post. Martha called the prosecutor in the city, explaining everything, the evidence, the van, the diary. The woman on the other end was silent for a long time before saying she'd be there in 4 hours, with a team. 4 hours that felt endless. Every minute was a risk that Joe would find out and destroy everything. Maria spread the evidence across the table, organizing it by date according to the diary. Each piece matched a name, a family, a child. She photographed every detail, building a record that couldn't be erased. Anthony stood guard at the window, rifle at his side, Lobo watching the door. The rain had turned the road to thick mud, both a blessing and a curse. Harder for the authorities to reach them, but harder for Joe to come to. It was Martha who finally broke the silence. "You know, when this comes out, the whole town's gonna pay the price. Joe's family owns half the land here. He employs most of the people. Without him, folks will struggle. And with him," Maria said, still working, "how many more kids would have died if that van hadn't stopped in '96? How many mothers would have kept searching for ghosts? We don't choose justice only when it's convenient." "I'm not saying to protect him," Martha sighed. I'm saying, be ready for what comes next. Small towns don't survive this kind of truth. People will blame us for speaking, for tearing open the quiet they've lived behind. Then let them, Anthony said, stepping away from the window. I've lived 30 years knowing I saw the signs and looked away. 30 years pretending the lies made sense because they were easier. I won't spend the next 30 carrying a bigger guilt, knowing I had a chance to set it right and didn't take it. Engines cut through the sound of rain. Anthony tensed, hand reaching for the rifle, but relaxed when he saw not one but 3 vehicles crawling up the muddy road. Police cruisers. The prosecutor hadn't come alone. She'd brought officers, investigators, even a judge. Martha's call had worked, and the woman had understood the gravity of what they'd found. Within 40 minutes, the house was crowded with law enforcement. The prosecutor, a woman in her 50s with gray hair tied back and sharp, unblinking eyes, moved through the evidence in silence. She examined everything, the diary, the photos, the map, her only reaction a tightening of her jaw. We'll need to excavate the marked sites, she said at last, closing the notebook. And we'll need to bring Joe in for questioning. If what you're telling me is true, he's guilty of covering up multiple child murders spanning 15 years. He'll deny it, Anthony said flatly. He'll claim he didn't know. Then we'll make him prove it, she replied. She sealed the diary in an evidence bag. The last entry says Joe knew in March of 1996. Gilbert died in June. Joe was the first person on the scene, alone for hours before calling for help. We'll investigate that too. If there's any sign it wasn't an accident, he's facing homicide charges. Maria stood. When do the digs start? At sunrise, the prosecutor said, glancing out the window at the downpour. I'm leaving 2 officers here tonight to guard you and the evidence. Joe can't know yet. When he does, it'll be too late to stop us. Anthony felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not relief, but the strange clarity that comes with finally doing the right thing, no matter the cost. He looked at Maria and Martha. The same emotion reflected back at him. Outside, the storm kept pounding the earth, but no rain would ever be strong enough to wash away what they were about to uncover. At dawn, the forest glistened with the last traces of the storm. 12 red X's marked across the land. 12 excavation teams spread out, guided by the map that had haunted Anthony since the moment he found it. He, Maria, and Martha stood beside the prosecutor at the first site, October 1981. She warned them not to watch, that it would be too much. But they refused. They had started this. They needed to see it through. It didn't take long. Barely a yard down, the shovel hit something solid. Small bones, pieces of fabric, and beside them, a faded plastic toy that time hadn't completely erased. The first victim. Over the next hours, every mark on that map revealed the same terrible truth. 12 children. 12 graves. 15 years of horror buried beneath the soil of their quiet little town. By noon, Joe was in handcuffs, caught trying to flee toward the state line. His car packed with cash and fake IDs. His guilt wasn't just in what he'd done. It was in every desperate move he made trying to run from it. And when they brought him in, under the gray morning light, he finally broke. Joe finally confessed. He'd known about the suspicions surrounding Gilbert since 1990, when a mother confronted him directly. He admitted to threatening families, silencing complaints, and using his power to keep the town quiet. As for his brother-in-law's death, he swore it was an accident, but that lie didn't last long. Forensic reports revealed the truth. The car's brakes had been tampered with. Gilbert hadn't lost control. Joe had made sure he never would again. He'd snapped when he realized Gilbert planned to confess. So he solved the problem the only way he knew how, by burying it one last time. The weeks that followed were devastating for the town. The story spread across the county, the state, the news. Families who had lived decades in silence finally had answers. 12 children, one by one. They were identified through old dental records, preserved clothes, or small personal belongings that had somehow survived the years. Clara was confirmed through her silver buckle and bone fragments matching her family's DNA. Peter through the beaded bracelet and bone growth analysis. 10 others got their names back. No longer just missing, no longer forgotten, but recognized as victims. Joe was sentenced to 30 years for obstruction of justice, aiding and abetting multiple murders, and homicide. Even at his age, he would never see freedom again. His land was seized, sold to pay restitution to the families. The town struggled, financially, emotionally, but it endured. Small places always do when they have no other choice. Maria stayed. She cared for her mother until the end and then made sure the story wouldn't fade. She led the effort to build a memorial in the center of town. 12 names carved in stone, 12 lives remembered. Anthony became its quiet guardian. He tended the flowers, kept the space clean, and told the story to anyone willing to listen. Martha continued her healing work, blessing homes, brewing her herbal remedies. But now she spoke openly of Peter, of the guilt she carried, and of the danger of silence. Lobo lived another 7 years, always by Anthony's side, always watchful. When he died of old age, they buried him near the memorial. A small plaque marked his resting place, guardian of truth, because that's what he was, the one who had smelled out what everyone else tried to forget, the one who refused to let the past stay buried. The white van was preserved as evidence, then donated to a museum that documented unresolved crimes, a physical reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters, that even the quietest towns can hide horrors, and that silence can kill as surely as violence. And in that town, mothers began teaching their children something new, not just to avoid strangers, but to speak up when something felt wrong, to never bury their fear, to understand that protecting a community sometimes means exposing its deepest wounds. The rain stopped. The sky cleared, and for the first time in decades, the air felt clean again.